Now, the Constitutional Review Committee kick-started public hearings into provinces across the South Africa to engage communities in the review of Section 25 of the Constitution. Among some of the challenges is the failure rate of land reform, is financing land reform, post-settlement support, and a lack of political will to form partnerships, a lack of skills transfer and good governance practices amongst the beneficiaries of land reform has been experienced in South Africa. Peter Setou is Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund, and let's chat to you. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for having me.
All right, so there's this extensive exercise that's taking place now, land reform, finding the best way to do it. The President has talked about making sure that it happens in a way that doesn't compromise the economy. The Freedom Charter itself talks about restriction of land ownership on a racial basis shall be ended and all land redivided amongst those who work it. So it's not just a question of just getting land, but doing something with it. And this is kind of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is where we come in as Vumelana Advisory Fund. I mean, our role is really to assist beneficiaries of land reform to develop their land. I mean, we do that through funding what we call transaction advisory services, essentially to assist them to mobilize private investment so that they can put their land into productive use. Our main focus is really to make sure that you can create much needed jobs, we can have skills transference to our people, and an income generation really for the community.
All right. You've seen a lot of communities get land, and what are typically some of the challenges and the problems that they've needed to overcome for it to be useful, and that it isn't just a piece of land in the end of the day?
Well, the reality of the situation is at the point when the land is transferred to the community, they don't have the requisite skills to actually run the land, to actually put the land to productive use. They also do not have access to finance, Now, which is where we are coming in as Vumelana, having realized some of the practical challenges that communities are facing. We've sort of come in with some interventions to make sure that we can assist them with mobilizing private investment. We are aware that we cannot all rely on government to actually perform this function. Hence, our approach in actually mobilizing, or rather structuring, what we call community-private partnership, essentially bringing in private investors to the table because they've got the necessary skill set to actually run the businesses. They've got access to capital. They also have access to markets.
All right, so by the time you get involved, land has been given to communities. What do you think needs to happen in the steps before that's different? Then this is what's being discussed at the moment. Are there things that you think that could happen even before people like you get involved that make the process of the day that you'd get the land much easier going forward?
Well, there are a number of things that I think needs to be put in place before land could be actually transferred. One, I think it is important firstly to do an assessment for the community to check, to do a needs assessment. For example, who are these communities? Do they have the necessary skill sets, etc.? And also to do an assessment on the land. For example, to say if you give them the land, what is it that this land can be used for? If there are existing businesses, for example, and people are employed, because remember, part of the challenge with the challenges that we've witnessed with land reform thus far is the fact that at a point when land is transferred, some people have actually lost jobs. So to prevent that from happening, it is crucial that before the land is actually transferred, you put in mechanisms and arrangements to make sure that those businesses do not collapse, and ensure that you can actually save existing jobs and also bring in much needed investment so that you can actually broaden the horizon and ensure that you can create further jobs.
If you had to attend these hearings and advise government and advise communities, what would you be telling them? I mean, you know, it does seem that we're 24 years down the line now. Something is not working because it's not moving as quickly as we would like. So what in your view could speed up this process, and do it in a way that everybody will be happy?
Well, there are a number of things, once again, that could be done by way of urgent interventions that we could put in place to make sure that land reform actually is a success, you know. Perhaps as a starting point, one needs to indicate that we have to adopt a flexible approach and also have a diverse set of interventions if land reform is to be a success. To really focus just on the Constitution as a key impediment, or rather as the only issue that's impacting on the success or otherwise of land reform, we think is not necessarily the right way, you know. It's far from anything really diverting attention to the real issues that are really facing the communities out there, including success in land reform. Now, if I were just to list quite a few issues that I think if we were just to do that, land reform could actually be improved. One, we've already talked about, pre-settlement interventions, i.e. to make sure that at a point when you transfer the land, it doesn't go into disuse, people do not lose jobs. We need to do that exercise. Two, we need to make sure that we, post-settlement, we provide support to these communities through a number of initiatives and interventions. For example, we need to make sure that they've got the requisite skills. We need to make sure that they've got support, for example, extension support in the agricultural space. For example, they need to have, you know, access to water rights so that they can run their businesses profitably. They need to have access to finance, for example. And hence, where we are actually emphasizing the need for private sector involvement to make sure that these projects do not actually fail. So that's post-settlement interventions that are required. And most importantly, one of the things that we have to continually focus on is the process itself. It tends to be tedious. We need to look at ways through which we can make, for example, the restitution process more efficient and effective. Currently, it takes longer. We are aware of some of the claims which were lodged about 20 years ago, and they haven't been resolved even as yet. So those are some of the issues that we need to address to say, how can we make the process more efficient? For example, you've got your large claims where you find that there are thousands of people who are employed. If it takes much longer to resolve such claims, you run the risk that those priceless assets are likely to disintegrate. You run the risk that people are likely to lose jobs. So you need to make that process more efficient. Fourthly, you need to make sure that you put in place measures to ensure that as and when there's conflict, for example, amongst the communities, because that does happen from time to time when you find that there's conflict amongst the communities. We need to make sure that we've got adequate and efficient dispute resolution mechanisms to ensure that we are able to intervene in a timely and efficient manner to make sure that the internal infightings amongst or intra-community infightings do not impact on this piece of land. And bringing in people with the requisite skills set into the equation.
Mr. Setou, this is a subject I think we need to revisit again and again and again, particularly as this process unfolds. But thank you very much for coming in. Sadly, we've run out of time, but your insights have been invaluable. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you very much.
All right, okay, we're going to leave the land question for the time being.